So they had 4 points, or maybe 5 points. But I think that sort of one rebuttal might be enough, but it would be sort of a big rebuttal. Because the problem is this. They say like, of course we're not going to teach racism or something like that. But this is a big no-no. We should teach gender inequality, or gender non-neutrality, that is. And the problem is that sort of the whole argument becomes a little bit weird then. Because they have a very sort of deep, passionate, principled speech about you should be allowed to teach whatever you want. They say in education, they say that it's important with democratic values, but not gender-neutral values. They say it's important with diversity between schools, but not to the point of racism. It's just that it should be so much diversity that gender inequality is still under the umbrella of this diversity, but racism should not be under the umbrella. And they said that should be one monolithic way, one paternalistic way of doing education. Okay, well, of course you shouldn't have racism and stuff like that, but you know, should we just force them to do, like, you also force people to do something. You also have your own limits. It's just that you accidentally decided that gender equality wasn't important enough to fall within those limits that we actually can enforce on all education. Or gender neutrality, sorry. I know that's more for you with the same thing. So starting with this, more particular point, this education point, and then say like, we're fooling people. We don't teach them how the world will look. We don't really know how it will look for 20 years when people start kindergarten. Today will start the real life. And actually our choice today will also affect what world we're coming into. So just assuming that the world will look this way and we have to adapt to that, we don't really know how the world will look, and we will actually change that world with this education that we do. So I think that's a bad argument. With diversity, yeah, those sort of this thing. They want diversity. Not racism diversity, just gender inequality diversity, which is a little bit like, you know. And all of this boils down to this big question. Is this an important issue enough to put in the same category as racism that we do force all schools to have within the diversity we accept? Because we accept diversity between schools, but not along all dimensions. And we will show, firstly, that this really, really propagates gender inequality. And we will do it by analysis of language and the most laughed at proposition of gender-neutral pronouns, which we think is a very important part of our proposal. And secondly, we will show more in depth the harm done by this gender stereotype on people's life, on actual life. And we believe that if we can bring home that this brings harm, then we've brought home the case, because they admit that if things bring harm, we can actually limit diversity in education, because they said that all along in their argumentation. So starting with this, you know, we claim that language is important. Because how do we create our moral intuitions and judgments? Well, sort of we go through life, we see all sorts of different situations, we hear what our friends say about it, we hear statements, we read books, we read articles, you know, we always have an opinion, sitting around the kitchen table discussing it. And every time we do this, we sort of build up a moral intuition, which gives us a very snapshot way of being able to judge different situations. This is good, this is bad, who's the bad guy, who's the good guy, who behaved well.
The analogy works something like this. We find it prohibiting people to say nigger and saying bitch. But we think that it should be allowed to be anti-immigration, and should be allowed to think that women should have skirts and men should have pants.
Thank you. You still have limits, and I will show that this is damaging enough to make sure that those limits apply to this case, because we'll show the damage done by this policy. So, we create these intuitions all the time. And then the reason is that stereotyping, that comes when we systematically judge men and women differently, although they're doing the same actions. When our sort of moral intuition, as developed in this sort of organic way, suddenly comes with a systematic discrimination between genders. And we say that it's very easy with our language for those stereotypes to occur. Why? Because we never had to judge something gender neutral. We read, he was very drunk last night and he threw up in the taxi on the way home. And then we might say, you know, oh God, such a jolly man, had a good party. Or she got really drunk and threw up in the taxi on the way home. Oh, what a tragic girl. However, if in school confront it got really drunk last night and it threw up in the taxi on the way home, then you actually have to picture this situation in a gender-neutral sense. It will constantly challenge you to develop moral intuitions which are independent of the gender of the person doing it. And we say that the school is enough to break down this. Even though you have very stereotypical parents, in school you will still be forced to read these gender-neutral sentences, judge actions independent of the gender of the person doing the action. And then you're forced to confront these acts neutrally. And that prevents you from developing these different moral universes, which we believe constitute the core of gender discrimination, that we consistently judge the same action differently depending on the gender of the person doing it. So, no, thank you. So then we can analyze then, what is the harm to the stereotype? Because I think consistency, like, stereotypes will come, and we have a very, very good way of counteracting them. Well, stereotypes are essentially you'll be judged differently. So firstly, it's sort of actually outrageous on a sort of rights issue, like, we actually believe that you judge for who you are, not what your gender appears to be. But also we see in practice that self-actualization is very much prevented by this. I mean, yes, of course some people might follow gender roles on their own, but how comes that now only girls ride, and before only boys did it? Can it be that suddenly all the girls' mind had changed so that now horseback riding is fun? And all boys think it's boring? Or do you think that actually, when you're perpetuating a norm, you're also actually imposing that norm on the other? When the first 90% of the girls refuse to play football and ride instead, they're actually excluding girls from football and excluding boys from riding because it becomes so awkward in a gender sort of way, because you feel like, oh God, I'm girly, and so on. So actually, these things prevent people from self-actualization, from doing things that actually is more fun. No, thank you. So essentially, it is that way things are done, and that is harm people because we like to do what we like to do. And it also actually harms other things, just like, on an individual level. I think it harms innovation in society, because innovation is actually questioning how things are done. So for example, a good example is in many countries women don't work that much. Essentially, it might be some sort of rationale before, I took a lot of time to sort of bring up children, have a home and so on, but with good restaurants, dishwasher, you don't really need that anymore. But just because this way things are done, we're just prevented from doing things which would be better for everyone. So essentially, we lose diversity by this gender inequality and this gender norms. So sort of summing, and that, I think, like we see the harms being done to this, we see those specific mechanisms going from the use of gender pronouns, use of gender non-neutral education in school, to this policy. I think that this says that this falls under the dimension where we actually should reduce diversity within schools, to expand diversity on all other areas of life. So summing up my statement, we build different moral universes by using different gender roles all the time in school, especially different gender pronouns. And secondly, we can see the harms done of this in the innovation society, also self-actualization, and actually the well-being of people. So we believe that expand diversity in society, reduce diversity in education in this one small dimension. Thank you.